Welcome back to the channel. Before we begin tonight's chilling story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new horror tale. And I have a question for you. What city are you watching from? And what time is it there right now? Leave your answer in the comments below. I read your comments with great excitement, and I love seeing where everyone is watching from around the world. Now dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's begin tonight's terrifying story. The road between Kingston and Millfield always looked harmless in daylight, but after midnight in October, it felt like the kind of place your headlights could only partially protect you from. I was 21 then, a junior at SUNY New Paltz, working 26 hours a week at a campus cafe, and still somehow always behind on rent. My name is Aaron Bell, and at that point in my life, I was tired in a way that made me careless. Not reckless, just worn down enough to ignore little things. That night, I was driving home from visiting my mother in Poughkeepsie. She had been sick that fall, nothing terminal, but enough to scare both of us. I left her apartment around 11:40 p.m. because I had an opening shift at 6:30 the next morning. The sky had that cold, low look it gets before rain, and wet leaves were plastered to the road like dark hands. I remember the pumpkin stand because it looked cheerful from far away. 2 strings of orange lights hung over a wooden table. A few pumpkins sat in neat rows beside hay bales, and a cardboard sign leaned against a crate. "Take one. Leave what you owe." I slowed down without meaning to. I had seen the stand before during the day, but it had always been busy then. A woman in a brown jacket would sit there with a thermos and a little dog. But past midnight, with no cellar, no house nearby, and the lights glowing by themselves, it looked wrong. I told myself it was just a roadside farm stand. People trusted each other out there. I had $12 cash in my cup holder and an apartment that looked depressing enough to need one small autumn decoration. So I pulled over. The gravel crunched under my tires. The road behind me went quiet except for wind dragging leaves across the shoulder. I left the car running, grabbed my phone, and walked toward the stand. The pumpkins were cold and damp. Most were normal, but one near the back had a long pale scratch across its side. I don't know why I picked that one. Maybe because it was smaller and easier to carry. Maybe because I felt bad for it. The cash box was an old metal one with a slot cut in the top. I dropped my $12 in. The sound was louder than I expected. Then I noticed something written beneath the main sign in much smaller letters. "Don't take what isn't yours." I stood there for a second with the pumpkin under my arm. It was probably meant for people who stole. I had paid, so it didn't apply to me. Still, as I walked back to my car, I glanced once toward the dark tree line behind the stand. I thought I saw something pale between the trunks. A face, maybe, or a plastic bag caught on a branch. I drove away fast enough that the pumpkin rolled off the passenger seat and hit the floor. When I got home, I placed it on the little table by my front door. My apartment was on the ground floor of a converted house on Orchard Street. It smelled like old radiator heat and whatever my downstairs neighbor cooked at night, usually onions and fried meat. I locked the door, put my keys in the bowl, and passed out on the couch without taking off my shoes. The next morning, the pumpkin was facing the door. I know that sounds stupid. It was a pumpkin. It didn't have a face carved into it, but the scratch on its side had been facing the living room when I set it down. Now the scratch faced the door, like a closed eye looking out. I blamed myself. I was exhausted. Maybe I had placed it differently. That was the first thing. The second thing happened 2 nights later. I came home from work around 9:15 p.m. The cafe had been slammed all day because parents' weekend was coming up, and I remember carrying a paper bag of leftover muffins, feeling like my knees were full of sand. The pumpkin was on the floor. Not smashed. Not rolled away. Just sitting directly in front of the door, centered on the mat, with the scratch facing up at me. I froze with one hand still on the doorknob. My apartment had been locked. Nothing else was missing. My laptop was on the desk. My game console was under the TV. The windows were latched. I said out loud, "Okay, no." Then I picked it up and put it in the kitchen sink. That night I barely slept. Around 2:40 a.m., I heard boards creak on the porch outside my window. The house was old and people came and went, so at first I lay still and listened. There was another creak, then another. Slow, careful. I sat up. My bedroom window faced the front porch. The blinds were down, but between two bent slats I could see the porch light. It flickered in that cheap yellow way rental lights do. Someone was standing outside. I didn't see a face, just jeans, boots, the lower edge of a dark coat. I grabbed my phone and called my landlord instead of the police, which was stupid. He didn't answer. By the time I opened my camera app and held it toward the blinds, the porch was empty. The next morning, there were wet leaf prints on the porch. I bought a security camera after that. Nothing expensive, just one of those wireless ones that sends alerts to your phone when it detects motion. I mounted it inside my window facing outward, thinking I'd catch a raccoon or a neighbor and feel dumb. For 2 nights, nothing happened. Then on Friday at 3:12 a.m., my phone buzzed. Motion detected. I opened the app half asleep. The video was grainy because of the porch light and dirty window glass. At first, it showed nothing but the empty porch. Then a person stepped into frame. They were wearing a hooded jacket and gloves. Their face was turned down. They stood with their back to the camera for a long time. In their hands was my pumpkin. The same scratch, the same size. I watched them lift it slowly, almost gently, and press it against my front door. Then they leaned forward and whispered something I couldn't hear. The clip ended. I didn't move for almost a full minute. My room was dark except for the glow of my phone. I could hear my own breathing, thin and shaky. I checked the kitchen sink. The pumpkin was gone. That was when I noticed the window over the sink was unlocked. I had never used that window. It was painted almost shut, or I thought it was. But someone had forced it open just enough to reach inside. I called 911. The officer who came was kind but tired. He took my statement, looked at the camera footage, and checked the window. He said it might be someone messing with students. He said he would file a report. He asked if I had any exes or problems with neighbors. I said no. That wasn't entirely true. There was a guy named Mason who came into the cafe sometimes. Mid-30s maybe, quiet, always ordered black coffee and sat near the window. He had asked me once if I lived nearby because he had seen me walking. I thought he was socially awkward. I had even joked with my co-worker Lena that he looked like he belonged in a true crime documentary. When the officer left, he told me to keep the doors and windows locked and call again if the person came back. The pumpkin stayed on the porch. I refused to touch it. The next afternoon, Lena came over after work. She wanted to help me calm down, and honestly, I didn't want to be alone. We sat in my living room with coffee, watching the security clip over and over. "That's not a prank," she said. "I know. Did he take anything?" "Just the pumpkin." She looked toward the front door. "What if something's inside it?" I laughed because I wanted that to be ridiculous. Then I stopped laughing. We brought it inside using a trash bag like gloves. I put it on the kitchen table. The room smelled like cold dirt. I got a knife. The first cut was hard. The rind was thicker than normal. When I opened the top, I expected seeds and pulp. Instead, something metal clinked against the blade. Lena whispered, "Aaron." Inside the pumpkin, wrapped in plastic and buried in the strings, was a car key. Not a house key. A car key with a black fob and a small silver tag. The tag had 3 letters scratched into it. MRK. I knew those initials. There was a missing person poster taped to the bulletin board outside the gas station near campus. I passed it every morning. A woman named Marissa Klein, 26, had disappeared 3 weeks earlier after leaving a roadside produce stand on Route 28. The poster showed her smiling in a denim jacket. I dropped the knife. Lena called the police this time. Everything after that felt unreal. 2 officers came first, then a detective named Harrow. They took the pumpkin, the key, my security footage, and my statement. When I mentioned the stand, Harrow's face changed. "What stand?" he asked. I told him. He and another officer drove me out there just before dusk. The stand was gone. Not closed. Gone. No table. No hay bales. No sign. No orange lights. Just a patch of flattened weeds beside the road and dark woods behind it. But the ground was torn up with tire marks. Fresh ones. They led from the shoulder into the trees, where a gap had been cut through the brush wide enough for a truck. I stood there with my arms wrapped around myself, watching the detective take photos. On a telephone pole nearby was Marissa Klein's missing poster. Rain had wrinkled the paper, and her smile was starting to blur. For 2 weeks, I barely left my apartment except for work. Police questioned people in the area. They searched the woods. They found cigarette butts, rope fibers, and one of those folding tables with orange paint on the legs, but they didn't find Marissa. They also didn't find whoever had been on my porch. The cafe manager pulled up security footage after Lena insisted. Mason was in the cafe the same morning after I bought the pumpkin. He sat by the window and watched me talk to Lena. When I left, he left 6 minutes later. The police questioned him. He said he had nothing to do with it. They didn't have enough to arrest him. After that, he stopped coming in. I moved out of that apartment before Thanksgiving. My mother said I was overreacting, but she helped me pack anyway. I deleted the cafe's public employee schedule from Instagram. I stopped walking home with headphones. I started noticing every car that passed me twice. 3 weeks after I moved, Lena called me crying. Someone had left a pumpkin on the porch of my old apartment. It was small, damp. A pale scratch ran down one side. The new tenant wasn't home, so Lena called the police herself. When they opened it, they found another key inside. This one had different initials. I still think about the sign. Take one. Leave what you owe. Back then, I thought it meant money. Now I think whoever made that stand understood something uglier about lonely, tired people like me. We stop because we want one harmless thing to feel normal. A decoration. A routine. A small proof that the world can still be trusted. But trust is not the same as ignoring the feeling that something is wrong. And sometimes the safest thing you can do is leave the pumpkin on the side of the road. Story 2. My little sister was the first one to say it looked like a real person. We had been in the house for 3 days, surrounded by cardboard boxes and the smell of fresh paint, when Emily stopped at the kitchen window with a bowl of cereal in her hand. "That thing is creepy," she said. I was 17 at the time, a senior in high school, angry at my parents for moving us from Rochester to a rural road outside Dansville, like we were characters in somebody else's punishment. My dad had lost his job at the printing plant and found cheaper rent in an old farmhouse. My mom called it a reset. I called it being stranded. I looked through the window. Across the narrow field beside our property stood a scarecrow. It was maybe 50 yards away, tied to a wooden post near the fence line of our neighbor's land. It wore faded jeans, a flannel shirt, work gloves, and a burlap sack over its head. Nothing unusual, really. There were cornfields all around us, and it was early October. But Emily was right. It had weight. Most scarecrows look floppy or silly, like they might fall apart in a breeze. This one stood straight, shoulders squared, head tilted slightly toward our house. Our neighbor, Mr. Calloway, owned the field. He was in his 70s, thin as a rake, with cloudy eyes and a voice that sounded like gravel in a bucket. He introduced himself the day after we moved in by standing at the edge of our driveway until my dad went outside. "Don't let the dog in my field," he said. "No hello. No welcome." My dad, trying to be friendly, said, "Sure. We'll keep him close." Mr. Calloway looked past him at our house. "People think fences are suggestions out here." Then he walked away. Our dog, Murphy, hated him immediately. Murphy was a 9-year-old mutt who loved everyone, including the mailman and the vet. But whenever Mr. Calloway came into view, Murphy lowered his head and made a sound I had never heard from him before. Not a bark, a warning. The scarecrow became part of the background at first. Every morning, I saw it from the kitchen window while making coffee. Every night, I saw its outline in the field when headlights swept across it from the road. I tried not to look at it, mostly because I hated that Emily had gotten in my head. Then on the 5th morning, it was closer. Not dramatically. Not like in a movie. Just close enough that I noticed. It had been near the far post by the old irrigation pipe. Now it stood about 10 feet nearer to our fence. I stared at it while my coffee went cold. My mom came in tying her hair back for work. "What? Did that scarecrow move?" She glanced out. "Probably the wind. Wind doesn't move a post." She didn't answer. She had been doing that a lot since the move, pretending not to hear things she didn't have energy to deal with. That afternoon, my dad mentioned it to Mr. Calloway when they ran into each other by the mailbox. I was in the driveway, close enough to hear. "Your scarecrow blew over or something?" Dad asked. Mr. Calloway looked toward the field. His face didn't change. "No, it looks closer to our fence." "No, it doesn't." My dad gave this polite little laugh. "Well, maybe I'm losing it." Mr. Calloway turned and looked straight at me. "Maybe." After that, I started taking pictures. Every morning before school, I snapped a photo from the kitchen window. I felt ridiculous doing it, like I was trying to prove a horror movie to myself. But by the end of the week, there was no question. The scarecrow was moving, a few feet at a time, always at night, always closer to our fence. My parents didn't want to believe it. My dad said Calloway was probably repositioning it to scare deer. My mom said we should stop looking for reasons to hate the new place. Emily stopped sleeping with her curtains open. Murphy stopped going outside after dark. On October 14th, I came home late from a shift at the Dollar General in town. It had been raining all evening, and the yard was soft enough that my shoes sank into the grass. As I crossed from the driveway to the porch, I heard something shift in the field. Not an animal, a slow, wet step. I turned. The scarecrow stood at the fence. Its burlap head faced our house. Its gloved hands hung at its sides. I could smell mud and wet straw from where I stood. I got inside and locked the door. My dad got angry when I told him. Not at me exactly, but at the situation. He grabbed a flashlight and went out into the rain. I watched from the window as the beam moved across the yard, then the fence, then the field. The scarecrow was back 20 feet from the fence. My dad stood there for a long time, rain shining on his jacket. When he came inside, he didn't make eye contact with me. "Go to bed," he said. That was the first time I felt afraid. Real fear is different from being creeped out. Being creeped out gives you stories to tell your friends. Real fear makes your body quiet. It makes every noise feel intentional. 2 nights later, Emily screamed. I was in my room doing homework when I heard it. Not a startled scream. A full, broken sound. I ran across the hall. Emily was backed against her closet, pointing at the window. Her curtains were open. Rain tapped lightly against the glass. There were muddy glove prints on the outside. "High up." "Press flat." My dad came in with a baseball bat. My mom pulled Emily into the hallway. I looked out the window and saw a shape moving across the yard. It was hunched now, fast, dragging one leg. "Call 911, I said. Dad ran downstairs. I stayed at the window, shaking so hard the frame blurred. The figure reached the fence and turned back. For half a second, the porch light caught its face. Not burlap. Skin. A man's face, smeared with mud, visible through a slit cut in the sack. He raised one gloved hand and tapped his fingers together like he was waving. Then he dropped into the field and vanished. The sheriff's deputy arrived 19 minutes later. By then, Mr. Calloway was outside too, standing in his bathrobe on his side of the fence. The deputy found footprints under Emily's window. Large boots. Mud. Bits of straw. He followed them across our yard to the fence, then into Calloway's field. Mr. Calloway kept saying, "Kids do things." The deputy asked if anyone else lived with him. No. Any hired help? No. Any reason someone would be in your field dressed like that? Mr. Calloway's mouth tightened. No, but he looked toward his barn when he said it. The next day, 2 deputies came back with a warrant. I don't know how they got it, maybe because of the footprints, maybe because my dad refused to let it go. They searched Calloway's barn. They found the scarecrow clothes hanging from a nail. They also found a sleeping bag, canned food, binoculars, and a cheap camera with a long lens. The person using them was Mr. Calloway's son, Daniel. He was 41, had lived with his father on and off for years, and according to the deputy, had a history of harassing neighbors. Not attacking them, just watching, appearing near windows, moving things around, leaving signs that he had been close. The old man had been covering for him. When they arrested Daniel, he didn't yell or fight. He just looked at our house from the back of the patrol car, calm as anything. Emily saw him and started crying again. We found out later that 2 other families had moved out of our house within 6 years. One lasted 4 months. One lasted less than 3 weeks. The landlord had never mentioned it, of course. People in town knew rumors, but rural towns have a strange way of treating long-term sickness like weather. Something unpleasant. Something you don't change. Something you just warn each other about too late. Daniel took a plea deal. Trespassing. Harassment. Some other charge related to the camera. It didn't feel like enough, but I was 17 and learning that fear rarely gets a punishment equal to the space it takes up inside you. My parents broke the lease in November. On the morning we left, the field was empty. No scarecrow, no post, just flattened grass and frost. Mr. Calloway stood on his porch, watching us load the truck. Before we pulled away, he walked to the end of his driveway. My dad told us not to roll down the windows, but I did, just a crack. Mr. Calloway looked at me with those cloudy eyes and said, "It chooses one house every fall." I used to think that sentence sounded supernatural. Now I think it was worse than that. He meant his family chose. He meant they had done it before. A month later, Emily sent me a photo she found on a local Facebook group. A young couple had moved into the farmhouse after us. In the background of their smiling porch picture, across the field, there was a scarecrow standing by the fence. The comments were full of pumpkin emojis and welcome messages. Nobody warned them. That house taught me something I wish every new family understood. A quiet road doesn't mean a peaceful road. An old neighbor doesn't mean a harmless neighbor. And when a dog who loves everyone refuses to step outside after sunset, maybe he understands the place better than you do. Story 3. By the time we took the picture in front of the barn, all 4 of us were pretending the night had fixed something. I was 24, living in a college town in northern Vermont, and working the front desk at a dental office while trying to decide whether my life was stalled or just quietly falling apart. My boyfriend had dumped me in September, and my friends had dragged me to the Briar Glen Harvest Festival because, according to them, apple cider donuts cure emotional damage. They didn't, but I appreciated the effort. It was one of those small-town festivals that looked designed for postcards. Strings of warm lights hung between maple trees. Kids ran around with painted faces. A bluegrass band played near the cider tent. Everything smelled like kettle corn, damp hay, wood smoke, and fried dough. The old barn stood at the far end of the field, decorated with pumpkins and fake cobwebs. A hand-painted sign said photo spot. Someone had arranged hay bales and orange mums in front of the doors. My friend Jess handed her phone to a woman passing by. "Can you take one of us?" The woman smiled. Of course. We squeezed together, laughing because Owen kept complaining that the hay was poking him through his jeans. The flash went off. For that moment, I felt almost normal. We didn't notice the man until later. We were at a diner after the festival, sitting in a red booth under buzzing lights, when Jess zoomed in on the photo. "Who is that?" she asked. Behind us, near the barn door, stood a man. He was tall and thin, wearing a dark coat buttoned up to his throat. His hair was gray, or maybe just pale under the lights. His face was half in shadow, but he appeared to be looking directly at the camera. I didn't remember anyone behind us. None of us did. Owen shrugged. "Photobomber." "Creepy photobomber," Jess said. We laughed because that's what you do when the alternative is admitting something feels off. Then Jess scrolled to the next photo, one she had taken by the cider press 10 minutes later. The man was there too. Farther back this time, standing beside the caramel apple booth, his face turned toward us. Jess stopped laughing. Mara leaned over the table. Maybe he just walked the same direction. "Yeah," I said. "It's a festival." But my stomach tightened. We checked every picture. He was in 3 of them. Not obvious. Not posing. Just present. Near the barn. Near the cider press. Near the exit. In the last one, taken as we were leaving, he stood by the parking lot fence. Closer than before. Owen made a joke about starting a podcast, but he watched the diner window while he said it. On the drive home, I told myself it was nothing. The next morning, Jess sent a message to our group chat. Look at this. It was a selfie she had taken in her apartment mirror before bed as a joke, because she still had festival glitter on her cheek. In the reflection, through the dark window behind her, a shape stood on the sidewalk outside. A man in a dark coat. Jess wrote, I live on the second floor. That's across the street. None of us responded for almost a minute. Then Owen wrote, lock your door. Mara wrote, call me. I called Jess. She was crying but trying to sound annoyed at herself. It's probably not him, she said. Send me your address again, I told her. Why? Just do it. I drove over in daylight. Mara came too. Owen had work, but kept texting us every few minutes like he could control the situation through his phone. Jess's apartment was above a bookstore on Linden Street. Across from her building was a closed insurance office with a recessed doorway. From there, someone could see her bedroom window. The doorway smelled like cigarettes. On the ground was a crushed paper cup from the festival cider stand. Jess stared at it and whispered, no. We went to the police station, where an officer listened, looked at the pictures, and used the word possible a lot. Possible coincidence. Possible local creep. Possible misunderstanding. He said to document everything and call if the man appeared again. That evening, Jess made her Instagram private. The man's account was already gone. That was the part that made it worse. She had posted the barn photo to her story before we noticed him. It had shown the festival location. Her username was public. Her tagged friends were public too. We had made ourselves easy to follow. On Monday, I got a message request. No profile picture. No posts. The username was just 3 letters and 4 numbers. You looked sad at the festival. I stared at the screen until it dimmed. Then another message appeared. Your friends don't watch behind them. I dropped my phone on my couch like it had burned me. I screenshotted everything, but when I went back to the chat, the messages were gone. The account had vanished. That night, I slept with a chair under my doorknob. On Wednesday, Mara found him in a photo from her workplace. She worked at a thrift store. The picture had been taken by a co-worker to show a new Halloween display near the front window. In the reflection of an old mirror for sale, a man in a dark coat stood across the street. The next day, Owen saw a silver sedan outside his gym for 40 minutes. When he left, it followed him for 6 blocks, then turned away. We stopped joking. We met at Owen's apartment because it had the best locks and his roommate owned a large, overly friendly dog. We printed the photos and laid them on the kitchen table. Jess said, he's closer in every one. She was right. Barn door. Booth. Parking fence. Across the street. Storefront reflection. Mara rubbed her arms. Why us? Nobody answered. Owen said, we should go back to the barn. I thought he was insane. But he said it was the only place we knew the man had definitely been. Maybe the festival organizers had cameras. Maybe someone remembered him. Maybe the barn was rented and had records. We went Saturday morning, when the field was empty and gray under a cold sky. Without the festival, the place looked abandoned. The strings of lights were still up, but dead. Pumpkins sagged in the grass. The barn doors were closed with a chain looped through the handles, but the chain wasn't locked. That should have been enough to make us leave. It wasn't. Inside, the barn smelled like dust, hay, and old rain. Our footsteps sounded too loud on the wooden floor. Light came through gaps in the walls and thin white lines. Then Jess whispered, guys. The back wall was covered in photos. Dozens of them. Some were old, curled at the edges. Some looked recent. Groups of people standing in front of the same barn. Couples, families, college kids, teenagers in costumes, 2 women holding cider cups, a group of boys in baseball jackets. In every set, the man appeared in the background. Far away in the first photo. Closer in the second. Closer again. Some sets had 5 or 6 pictures, all pinned in a line. My mouth went dry. Owen stepped closer to one of the newer rows. It was us. The barn photo, the cider press photo, the parking lot photo, Jess's window, Mara's thrift store. There was an empty space after Mara's photo. A thumbtack was already pressed into the wood, waiting. Behind us, a floorboard creaked. We turned. The man stood inside the barn entrance. In daylight, he looked older than I expected, maybe 60. Pale skin, narrow mouth, gray hair combed neatly back. His dark coat was buttoned to his throat. None of us moved. He smiled slightly, not with happiness, but like he recognized us. "You came back," he said. Owen stepped in front of us. "We're calling the cops." The man tilted his head. "No signal in here." He was right. I had checked without meaning to. One bar, then none. Mara grabbed my wrist. The man took one step forward. That broke whatever spell we were under. We ran. Owen shoved a stack of hay bales into the man's path. Jess screamed. I hit the side door with my shoulder and spilled out into wet weeds. We tore across the field toward the road, not looking back until we reached the car. The man didn't chase us. He stood in the barn doorway watching. At the police station, the officer looked less patient this time. We showed him the photos from the wall. We showed him the messages. Owen had managed to take one shaky video as we ran, and it clearly showed the man standing in the doorway. By the time police reached the barn, the wall was bare. Every photo was gone, but they found fresh tack holes in the wood. They found footprints. They found a folding chair in the back corner, cigarette ash, and a list of names written on a piece of cardboard. Jess's name was on it. So was mine. They identified him from the video as a man named Leonard Vale. He had worked seasonal maintenance for the town years before and had been banned from 2 local events for harassing women. He lived alone outside Briar Glen and disappeared before they could question him. For a while, nothing happened. No messages, no sightings, no silver car. We tried to let life become normal again, but it came back wrong. Jess moved her bed away from the window. Mara stopped closing the thrift store alone. Owen pretended he was fine, but walked us to our cars every time we met. I deleted every public photo of myself I could find. 3 months later, I received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a printed photo. It showed my apartment building at night. My bedroom window was visible on the 2nd floor. The curtains were open just a crack, because I had opened them that morning to let in light and forgotten. In the lower corner of the photo, reflected in the glass of a parked car, was the person holding the camera. A dark coat, a pale face. I moved the next week. People think the scary part is being followed. It isn't. Not exactly. The scary part is realizing how much of yourself you leave out in the world without thinking. Your face, your routine, your tag location, your window with the lamp on, your grief visible enough for a stranger to notice. I still take pictures with my friends, but before I smile, I look behind us. Story 4. The first thing I remember is the smell of smoke and wet pine. Not fear, not footsteps, not the voice reading my name from a notebook. Smoke. I was 19, a freshman at a community college near Flagstaff, Arizona, still living with my aunt because dorms were too expensive and my scholarship barely covered books. I worked evenings at a sandwich shop off Milton Road, and most nights I went home smelling like bread, bleach, and onions. That October, I was lonely in the specific way you get when everyone assumes college automatically gives you a life. I had classmates, co-workers, people I texted sometimes, but no real group yet. So when a guy from my history class named Caleb invited me to a bonfire with his friends, I said yes too fast. The plan was simple. Saturday night. Forest Road outside town. Nothing crazy. Just music, snacks, maybe 20 people. At 10:18 p.m., our group chat got a location pin. Caleb wrote, "Head here. Parked by the old gate." I was already dressed, wearing my black hoodie and the boots my aunt hated because they had no grip. She was asleep on the couch when I left. I told myself I wasn't sneaking out. I was an adult. Adults don't sneak. Still, I locked the door quietly. The road out there was darker than I expected. The city lights disappeared behind me, and the trees closed in. My phone kept losing service, then finding one bar, then losing it again. I followed the pin down a dirt road that scraped the underside of my Civic. At 10:46, I saw smoke between the trees. I parked near a rusted cattle gate where 3 other cars were already pulled off to the side. None of them looked familiar, but I didn't know Caleb's friends, so that didn't bother me yet. I walked toward the firelight. The woods were damp from an afternoon rain. My boots sank into pine needles. Music should have been playing. People should have been laughing. Instead, I heard only the fire, crackling, breathing. When I reached the clearing, I stopped. There were maybe 12 adults standing around the bonfire. Not college kids. Adults. Men and women in their 40s and 50s, dressed in dark jackets, hands folded or hanging at their sides. Nobody held drinks. Nobody talked. They all looked toward the fire. For a few seconds, I thought maybe I had walked into some private memorial. I started backing away, embarrassed. Then one of them looked up, a woman with short blonde hair. Her face was calm, but her eyes moved straight to me like she had been waiting. "Eli," she said. "My name is Elias, but only my aunt called me Eli." I turned and walked back the way I came, trying not to run. Behind me, a man said, "He's here." That was enough. I ran. I made it maybe 30 feet before I realized I couldn't see the trail anymore. The firelight had ruined my night vision. Every tree looked the same. My phone had no service, and the blue dot on the map spun uselessly in the dark. I crouched behind a fallen log and covered my mouth with one hand. People moved through the woods behind me. Not crashing, not shouting, walking, calm. That was worse. I heard the blonde woman say, "Don't scare him too much." A man answered, "He needs to listen." I didn't understand any of it. My brain kept trying to make it normal. Maybe it was a church group. Maybe Caleb had sent the wrong pin. Maybe they thought I was someone else. Then I heard paper rustle. The woman's voice carried clearly through the trees. Elias Moreno, 19, lives with his aunt, Teresa Alvarez, on Juniper Avenue. Works closing shifts at Mesa Subs, usually takes the alley behind the shop to save time. My chest tightened. She continued. Mother deceased. Father unknown. Anxiety noted. Financial stress. Wants friends badly enough to meet strangers after dark. I pressed my hand harder against my mouth. They knew things no stranger should know. My phone vibrated. A message from Caleb. "Where are you?" "We're all at the spot." I stared at it. Then another message appeared below it. The pin in the chat was gone. Not replaced. Gone. I typed, "Call me." The text failed. The footsteps came closer. I crawled backward through wet needles until my shoulder hit a tree. Something snapped under my boot. Everyone went quiet. For one long second, the woods held its breath. Then a flashlight switched on. White light cut over the log, over the tree, over my sleeve. "There," a man said. I ran again. Branches hit my face. I slipped twice. My lungs burned. Behind me, I heard footsteps speeding up, then someone shouted, "Stop running, Eli. You'll get hurt." That made me run faster. I came out onto the dirt road farther from my car than I expected. For a terrifying second, I saw nothing but trees. Then headlights appeared around a bend. I stepped into the road waving both arms. The truck slammed its brakes. The driver was a woman in a work jacket with a county parks logo. She rolled down the window halfway. "Are you okay?" "No," I said. "Please. I need help." She looked past me into the trees. Her face changed. "Get in." Her name was Dana. She was checking trail closures after reports of illegal fires. She locked the doors as soon as I climbed in. As she turned the truck around, 3 figures stepped out of the tree line. They didn't run after us. They just watched. Dana radioed it in. 10 minutes later, we passed another clearing. There was the real bonfire. Music. Laughter. Caleb standing by a cooler, phone in hand, looking panicked. When he saw me in the county truck, his face went white. "I didn't send that pin," he kept saying. "I swear. I didn't send it." I believed him. The police did too after checking his phone. Someone had accessed the group chat through a spoofed account using his name and photo. The message had appeared for some people and vanished before anyone could screenshot it. I had been the only one who left early enough to follow it. A deputy found my car near the old gate. On the windshield, under one wiper, was a folded page torn from a notebook. It listed my schedule for the past week. Monday, closed shop 11:12 p.m. Tuesday, bought gas Circle K. Wednesday, sat outside library alone. Thursday, walked alley headphones in. Friday, argued with aunt, left house at 8:03. I felt sick reading it. They had watched me for days, maybe longer. The investigation moved slowly because nobody at the clearing was there when police arrived. The fire had been doused. The cars were gone, but there were tire tracks, boot prints, and pages from the same notebook burned at the edge of the fire. A detective told my aunt the group might have been connected to a local self-improvement retreat that recruited vulnerable young adults. That phrase sounded too clean for what happened. They had not invited me. They had studied me, isolated me, and led me somewhere with no signal. My aunt blamed herself for sleeping through me leaving. I told her not to. I blamed myself too, though, for needing to be included so badly that I followed a pin into the woods without asking a single question. 2 nights after the bonfire, I woke up to tapping on my bedroom window. Not loud, just 3 soft taps. I lay frozen under my blanket. My room was on the 1st floor. The blinds were closed. I couldn't see who was outside, and I didn't want to. My aunt called 911 while I crawled into the hallway. By the time police came, no one was there. But on the outside windowsill was a smear of gray ash. Folded beneath a small rock was another notebook page. This one had only 1 sentence written on it. You were almost ready. I stopped going to night classes. I changed jobs. My aunt installed motion lights, cameras, and a chain lock. Caleb apologized so many times I eventually had to tell him to stop, because his guilt was becoming another thing I had to carry. For months, I couldn't smell smoke without feeling my body go cold. I still love autumn. I still like bonfires from a distance. But I don't follow pins sent at night. I don't assume a familiar name on a screen means a familiar person is behind it. And I don't mistake loneliness for permission to ignore my own fear. Wanting friends is human. But anyone who uses that need to lead you into the dark was never offering friendship. Story 5. I moved into my grandmother's house because grief makes bad ideas feel practical. I was 32, newly divorced, working remote customer support for a medical billing company, and paying rent in Columbus that climbed higher every year while my bank account stayed exactly where it was. When my grandmother died and left me her old house in Ashford, Ohio, everyone said I was lucky. Free house, fresh start, quiet town. They left out the fact that the house had been empty for 8 years and still smelled like dust, mouse traps, and the lavender soap she kept in every bathroom. They left out the way grief waits in familiar rooms. They left out the feeling of sleeping beneath a roof where half your childhood had happened and realizing you were the only one left to remember it correctly. The leaves started the second morning. I opened the front door with a mug of coffee in my hand and found my yard covered. Not sprinkled, covered. Dry brown leaves blanketed the grass from the porch steps to the mailbox, thick enough to hide my shoes when I stepped outside. The strange part was that there were no big trees in my front yard. The only maple nearby stood across the street, and it was still mostly full. I stared at the leaves, annoyed more than afraid. The neighbor to my left, Mrs. Rusk, was watering dead mums on her porch. Does this happen every year? I called. She looked over, then at the yard. Her expression changed quickly, but not quickly enough. Wind's funny out here, she said. That was all. I spent 2 hours raking. The leaves were bone dry despite the wet air, and they made a papery scraping sound that set my teeth on edge. Under the pile near the porch, I found a small pink bracelet. Plastic beads, stretchy cord, a silver heart charm. I knew it immediately. I had worn it when I was 7. My grandmother bought it for me at the county fair. I remembered losing it in her backyard and crying so hard she gave me 2 scoops of ice cream to calm me down. I stood there with the bracelet in my palm, feeling like a door had opened somewhere inside me. I told myself the rake had pulled it out of the dirt. That explanation lasted until the next morning. The leaves were back. This time the pile was deeper, gathered mostly around the porch like someone had pushed them there. Beneath them, I found an old school badge from Ashford Elementary, the kind we wore on field trips. My name was written on masking tape across the front. Natalie P. I hadn't seen it in 20 years. I called my mother. She had moved to Florida after the divorce from my dad and avoided talking about Ashford whenever possible. When I told her about the bracelet and badge, she went quiet. "Mom, where exactly did you find them?" "In the leaves." "Don't be dramatic, Natalie." "I'm not. You probably had boxes in the attic." "I haven't opened the attic." Another pause. Then she said, "Lock your doors." That was when I started to feel something colder than nostalgia. The house had 4 doors: front, back, basement, and a side door through the laundry room. I checked them all. The side door lock was loose. I made a note to replace it and spent the evening working at my kitchen table while rain tapped against the windows. At 1:13 a.m., I heard leaves scraping. At first I thought it was wind against the porch. Then I realized the sound was inside. A dry, dragging whisper across wood. I sat perfectly still in the kitchen chair. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. It came from the basement door. I grabbed my phone and a knife from the block, then stood there feeling absurd and terrified. The basement door was closed. The brass knob looked dull in the kitchen light. "Nobody's there," I whispered. But I didn't believe myself. I called 911 and said I thought someone was in my basement. The dispatcher kept me on the line until 2 officers arrived. They searched the house with flashlights while I stood on the porch in a sweatshirt, shaking in the cold. They found no one, but the basement floor was covered in leaves. Not a few blown in through a crack, covered like the front yard. One officer found the outside cellar hatch behind the house. The old padlock had been cut and placed back to look intact. Someone had been inside. After that, the police took it seriously. They made a report. They photographed the leaves, the hatch, the objects I had found. They told me to stay somewhere else if I could. I should have left that night, but I was tired of being pushed out of places. Out of my marriage. Out of my apartment. Out of the life I thought I was building. The house was mine, and some part of me wanted to prove I could stay. So I called a locksmith, bought 2 cameras, and slept on the couch with every light on. The next few days were quiet. No leaves. No sounds. No objects. Then a cardboard box appeared on the basement steps. I found it on a Thursday morning when I opened the door to do laundry. It was small, water-stained, and tied with twine. My name was carved into the lid with something sharp. Natalie. I backed away and called the police before touching it. An officer opened it on my kitchen table while I stood by the sink. Inside was a cassette tape and a little recorder, the kind children used in the 90s. The label on the tape said October Game. My hands went numb. The officer asked, "Do you know what this is?" I shook my head, but that wasn't completely true. Something about the label pulled at an old memory. My grandmother laughing too loudly. My mother crying in the bathroom. A man's boots on the porch. Leaves stuck to the hallway rug. They played the tape. Static hissed first. Then a child's voice came through. My voice. "If I forget," little me said, slow and rehearsed, "I'm not supposed to stay in the house after October. Grandma says he comes when the leaves come." I covered my mouth. The officer stopped the tape. "Who is he?" I couldn't answer. My mother could. When I called her again, she started crying before I finished explaining. She told me there had been a man named Paul Devlin who worked as a handyman for my grandmother. He had become obsessed with my mother after my father left. He watched the house, left things on the porch, moved objects around, and dumped leaves in the yard because my grandmother once complained she hated raking. When my mother threatened to call police, he started leaving my childhood things outside to prove he had been inside. The tape was my grandmother's idea. She made me record it after Paul scared us badly one October night. She thought if anything happened to her, the tape might help me remember enough to stay away. But I was 7. Kids bury what adults cannot explain. Paul was arrested back then for breaking into the house, but the charges didn't stick the way they should have. He left town, or people thought he did. The police found him 3 days later living in a trailer less than 15 miles away. He was 68 now, thin, quiet, polite. In his shed, they found bags of dry leaves, old photographs of my grandmother's house, and a plastic storage bin full of things that had belonged to me. Birthday cards, hair clips, a cracked music box, a photo of me on the porch missing one front tooth. He had taken them years ago. He had kept them. When the officer told me that, I had to sit down on the floor. Paul admitted to entering through the cellar hatch. He said he only wanted me to remember the rules. He said the house didn't like being inherited by strangers. He called me a stranger in my own grandmother's home. I sold the house in January. People asked why I didn't keep it after he was arrested. They said it was safe now. They said I was letting him win. Maybe. But safety is not just locks and police reports. Sometimes safety is refusing to live inside a place someone else has turned into a trap for your memories. The woman who bought the house was a nurse from Dayton. I told her everything. The police reports, the basement hatch, the leaves, Paul. She listened carefully and said she wasn't easily scared. I believed her. The next October, she called me. Her voice was calm, but too calm. "Did you ever find leaves in the upstairs hallway?" she asked. My throat tightened. "No," I said. "Why?" She didn't answer right away. Then she said, "I think someone had a key before the locks were changed." The police later found a hidden copy tucked behind loose siding near the back porch. Maybe Paul had left it there years earlier. Maybe someone else had known. I don't know. What I do know is that ordinary objects can become warnings if they appear where they don't belong. A bracelet, a school badge, a pile of leaves in a room with no open window. I used to think the past could only haunt you in your head. Now I know sometimes it has hands, and sometimes it still knows where you live. Story 7. 2 weeks before Halloween, my little brother came home with a candy bar he refused to eat. That was strange because Noah was 12, and at 12 he would have eaten chocolate off the floor if no one stopped him. I was 19 then, taking classes at a community college outside Dayton and working closing shifts at a pharmacy. My mom was a night nurse, so most evenings I was the one making frozen pizza, checking homework, and pretending I was not exhausted. We lived on Marigold Street, the kind of neighborhood where people left folding chairs on porches, and everyone knew which houses gave out full-size candy bars. But the blue house at the end of the street was different. Nobody knew who lived there. The porch light was always on. The curtains were always shut. The mailbox had no name, just a strip of black tape over the numbers. It sat between two empty lots, set farther back from the road than the other houses, like it was trying not to be noticed. Noah dropped the candy bar on the kitchen counter. "Where did you get this?" I asked. He kept his eyes on the floor. "That house." "What house?" "The one with the porch light." I looked at the wrapper. It was normal, sealed, a small Milky Way. "It's not Halloween," I said. "I know. Did someone tell you to come over?" He shrugged, but his face had gone pale in a way I did not like. Later that night, I found the candy bar in the trash, buried under paper towels. The next day, 3 other kids on our street had candy from the same house. None of them would talk about it. One boy cried when his dad asked if someone had touched him. He shook his head no, but he would not say anything else. That was when I decided to record the house. I told myself I was being responsible, not reckless. My mom was at work. Noah was asleep. I put on my hoodie, opened my camera app, and walked down the sidewalk at 9:17 p.m. The street was quiet except for distant traffic and the buzz of porch lights. Leaves scraped across the pavement. The blue house glowed at the end of the block, its single porch bulb bright and steady. As I got closer, I noticed something I had missed before. The windows were fake. Not completely fake, but covered from the inside with black plastic, with curtains taped over them. The porch looked real from the street, but up close, the railing was newer than the house, made of cheap boards painted too quickly. I started recording. The front door opened before I knocked. An old woman stood there in a purple cardigan. She was small, with thin white hair and glasses that made her eyes look watery and huge. She smiled. "Well," she said, "there's my June bug." I stopped breathing. Only one person had ever called me that. My grandmother. She had died when I was 14. "What did you say?" I asked. The woman tilted her head. "You look just like her, Maya." My name was not on my hoodie. It was not on my backpack. I had never met this woman in my life. I should have left right then. Instead, I said, "How do you know my name?" She opened the door wider. "Your brother told me." That was a lie. Noah barely said hello to adults he knew. Behind her, the house smelled like dust, old candy, and hot plastic. The front room was too bright, lit by work lamps instead of ceiling lights. There were bowls of candy on a card table. A child's coat hung over a chair. And on the wall were pictures. Framed photos of kids from our neighborhood. Some were school pictures. Some were printed from social media. But others were not. A picture of the boy from across the street riding his bike. A girl from 2 houses down sitting at her kitchen table. Noah asleep on our living room couch under his dinosaur blanket. My hand tightened around my phone. The old woman followed my eyes. "Families are so careless with windows," she said softly. A floorboard creaked behind me. I turned and saw a man standing in the hallway. He was maybe 40, wearing a tan jacket and blue latex gloves. He did not look angry. That made it worse. He looked bored. The old woman said, "Come inside, honey. We just want to talk." I stepped backward. "My mom's waiting." "No, she isn't." The man took 1 step forward. I ran. The woman grabbed my sleeve, but the fabric tore. I flew off the porch, slipped on wet leaves, and hit my knee hard on the walkway. I still had my phone in my hand. The recording was still going. I got home, locked the door, and shoved a chair under the knob like people do in movies. Then I woke Noah and called my mom. The police came 20 minutes later. By then, the porch light was off. When officers reached the end of the street, they found something that made everyone sound confused over the radio. There was no blue house. Not really. There had been 1 year earlier, before a fire. What remained was a concrete foundation, a narrow storage trailer, and a temporary porch built from plywood and painted blue. From the street, in the dark, with that light on, your brain filled in the rest. Inside the trailer, police found candy, children's jackets, printed photos, and a laptop with folders labeled by street names. They also found a page from my grandmother's obituary, printed from an online memorial site. My nickname was in one of the comments. My video did not show the old woman's face clearly. Somehow, every time she stepped into frame, the porch light flared and washed her out. The man appeared for only 1 second, a shape in the doorway. But it was enough for the police to take it seriously. Noah finally told me what happened. The woman had shown him the picture of him sleeping and said if he told anyone, she would come back when Mom was gone. They never caught them. 3 days before Halloween, I found a paper candy bag on our porch. It was folded neatly at the top. My name was written on it in black marker. Maya. Inside was the torn piece of my hoodie sleeve. We moved before Christmas. I used to think danger announced itself. A van slowing down. A stranger grabbing your arm. A scream in the dark. Now I know it can look like a porch light in a quiet neighborhood, offering candy too early, and knowing exactly which name will make you freeze. Story 8. The last normal sound I heard that night was a basketball bouncing in the gym. After that, the whole school seemed to hold its breath. I was 17, a senior at Briar Glen High, and I stayed late for volleyball practice almost every weekday that fall. I was not the best player, but I was reliable, which meant I was always the one carrying ball carts, folding nets, and waiting for rides after everyone else left. That October, I was tired all the time. My parents were divorcing, my grades were slipping, and my coach kept telling me scouts like positive body language, which was hard when I felt like I was living underwater. After practice, I realized I had left my gray hoodie in my locker. It was 7:46 p.m. The parking lot was half empty. Rain tapped against the glass doors. Coach Miller was in the gym office on a phone call, so I told her I'd be right back. Most of the hallway lights were off. Schools feel wrong after hours. The same place where hundreds of people talk and slam lockers all day turns hollow. Every vending machine hum sounds louder. Every trophy case catches reflections it should not. My locker was near the science wing, past the main office and the old trophy case. I walked fast, my sneakers squeaking on the floor. Halfway there, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned. The hall was empty. I told myself it was the echo of my own shoes. Old buildings do that. They throw sound around. I kept walking. The footsteps came again, not matching mine this time. Slower. I stopped. They stopped too. My mouth went dry. "Hello," I called. No answer. I almost laughed because it felt stupid. This was my school. I knew every bulletin board, every cracked tile, every smell of floor wax and pencil shavings. Then I passed the trophy case. In the reflection, someone was standing behind me, a tall shape near the drinking fountain. I spun around so fast my gym bag hit the wall. No one was there. The trophy case reflected only me, pale and wide-eyed under the emergency light. I started walking faster. When I reached my locker, it was already open. My hoodie was hanging from the hook inside, but something had been placed on top of it. A folded piece of notebook paper. My name was written on the front. Tessa. The handwriting looked like mine. Not similar. Mine. The letters slanted the way mine did when I wrote fast. They had the same little hook. My stomach turned as I opened it. "Do not leave through the front doors." That was all. For a second, I could not move. Then the fire alarm went off. The sound exploded through the hallway, bright and mechanical. Red lights flashed along the ceiling. Every instinct told me to leave the building. Fire drills had trained that into us since kindergarten. The front doors were closest. I looked down at the note again. "Do not leave through the front doors." A shadow moved at the far end of the hall. This time I saw enough. A man. Not a student. Not a teacher. He was standing near the office, half hidden by the corner, wearing a dark jacket and a baseball cap pulled low. He did not run when he saw me looking. He lifted one hand and pointed toward the front entrance, like he was directing me. I went cold all over. Then I ran the other way. The alarm shrieked above me. My shoulders slammed into lockers. I cut through the science hall, past the biology room, and shoved open the side door by the loading area. Cold rain hit my face. Outside, a police cruiser sat near the front entrance with its lights off. Another pulled in behind it. An officer shouted, "Get away from the building." I ran toward him sobbing so hard I could barely explain. They found the man near the front doors. He had broken in through a small office window after practice started. He was not armed with anything dramatic, not like in movies. That almost made it worse. He had a fake district maintenance badge, a flashlight, and a printed schedule of girls' sports practices. Coach Miller later told police she had noticed him in the parking lot twice that week, but assumed he was a parent. The strangest part was the alarm. The school fire alarm system had been disconnected that afternoon for repairs. It should not have gone off through the whole building. The only thing still active was an old manual bell system near the gym storage room, something nobody used anymore. The note disappeared before I could show it to anyone. For months, that part bothered me more than the man. Then in January, the assistant custodian, Mr. Vega, stopped me after school. He looked nervous. He asked if I was doing okay. I said yes, even though I wasn't. He told me he had seen the man near the front doors that night through a hallway camera feed. The office phone was dead because of the alarm repairs, and his radio battery was almost gone. He did not know where I was, only that my locker was open because the man had been standing by it earlier. So Mr. Vega had grabbed a page from my locker, written the warning on it, and dropped it inside before running to trigger the old bell. "It wasn't your handwriting," he said quietly. "It was your paper. Maybe your pen. I'm sorry if that scared you." I thanked him, but I could barely speak. The man never explained why he chose our school. People wanted a clean answer, something that would make them feel safer. He was mentally ill. He was a predator. He was just looking for somewhere to hide. Maybe all of that was true. I graduated that spring, but I still do not wear both earbuds when I'm walking alone. I check reflections in windows. I notice exits before I notice decorations. That night taught me that panic is not always the enemy. Sometimes fear is your mind reading the room faster than you can. Story 9. By the time we reached the cabin, my dad had stopped pretending he knew where we were. The GPS had lost signal 20 minutes earlier, somewhere in the hills outside Boone, North Carolina. The dirt road twisted through orange trees and wet leaves, climbing higher until the headlights showed nothing but fog and the occasional white flash of a fence post. I was 24, managing a small restaurant and living paycheck to paycheck. My parents were trying to act normal after my dad got laid off from the paper plant. My mom said the trip would be good for us. Just 4 days, she kept saying. No bills, no bad news, no phones. The cabin looked perfect at first. Small, warm, a little old-fashioned. Yellow porch light, stone chimney, rocking chairs, pumpkins by the steps. Inside, it smelled like pine cleaner, old wood, and cinnamon candles. There were plaid blankets over the couch and a shelf of board games missing half their pieces. My little sister, Kate, claimed the upstairs loft immediately. I took the couch. That first night, we made spaghetti, listened to rain on the roof, and played cards by the fireplace. For a few hours, we felt like the family we used to be. Then Kate found the guest book. It was in a drawer under the coffee table. Brown leather cover. Thick pages. Most of the entries were normal. Beautiful view. Loved the hot tub. Saw deer at sunrise. But near the back, the tone changed. The first strange entry was from 3 months earlier. Heard walking above us at 2 a.m., probably branches. Still creepy. The next one said, owner should check roof. Sounds like someone pacing. Then, do not sleep in the loft. My mom closed the book. People like scaring themselves in cabins. Dad nodded too quickly. Old roof. Animals. That's all. I wanted to believe him. That night, I woke up at 2:13 a.m. The fire had gone low. The cabin was dark except for the blue light on the microwave clock. Above me, something moved across the roof. Slow. Step. Pause. Step. I sat up on the couch. Another step came from directly over the loft. Kate whispered from upstairs, Sarah? Dad came out of the bedroom holding his phone like a flashlight. Probably a raccoon, he said. Then someone knocked from above. 3 slow taps. Right over my parents' bedroom. My mom started crying without making a sound. Dad pulled on his boots and went outside before any of us could stop him. We watched his flashlight beam move past the windows. Rain fell hard through the porch light. He came back 5 minutes later soaked and pale. There are footprints, he said. Nobody spoke. Muddy footprints, he continued. On the roof. We left before sunrise. We did not pack well. We threw clothes into bags, forgot phone chargers, left groceries in the fridge. As Dad backed down the dirt road, I looked through the rear window and saw the upstairs loft curtain move. No face, just the curtain shifting back into place. When we got signal, my mom called the rental company. The woman on the phone sounded annoyed until my mom mentioned the roof. That cabin doesn't have roof access, she said. Dad said, there's a loft. Yes, but no attic, the woman replied. No crawl space. Nothing above. That was a lie. A week later, a deputy called us. They had searched the cabin after another family reported hearing someone whispering through the ceiling vent. Behind a wood panel in the loft, police found a narrow maintenance space built under the roofline. It was not on the rental listing. The owner claimed he didn't know it existed, but there was a sleeping bag inside, bottled water, snack wrappers, and a small notebook full of dates. Our dates were circled. The man they arrested had worked for a cleaning contractor that serviced vacation rentals. He had keys copied. He knew which cabins would be isolated. He liked making families think the house itself was wrong before showing himself. That explanation should have made it better. It did not, because when we unpacked at home, the guest book was in my mother's suitcase. None of us remembered packing it. The last page had a new entry. We heard him above us. We left before morning. I should have trusted Sarah sooner. It was written in my mother's handwriting. Mom swore she had not touched it. Police later said the man had samples of guests writing from check-in forms and notes left at other rentals. Maybe he copied her handwriting before slipping the book into her bag while we were loading the car. Maybe. I keep telling myself that because the alternative does not help me sleep. My parents never rented another cabin. Kate refuses to stay anywhere with a loft. As for me, I check closets, vents, crawlspace doors, ceiling panels, and attic hatches before I bring in my luggage. I read guest books from the back first. A beautiful place can still be unsafe. That was the part one had to learn. Comfort is not proof of protection. Sometimes it is just the first layer of the trap. Story 10. My grandfather's orchard had one rule that sounded like a superstition. Leave the last apple. Not the best apple. Not the biggest. The last. I was 13 the year I broke that rule. Our farm sat outside Sodus, New York, close enough to Lake Ontario that cold wind carried the smell of water through the trees. By late October, the orchard looked exhausted. The rows were muddy, the ladders were stacked, and the packing shed smelled like waxed cardboard and cider vinegar. My grandfather was 73 and built like a fence post. He rarely explained himself. He believed kids learned by working and adults survived by noticing things early. That year, I hated the orchard. I hated waking up before sunrise. I hated my cracked hands. I hated that my friends spent weekends at the movies while I sorted apples with old men who talked about weather like it was gossip. At the far edge of the property stood a dead-looking tree. It was twisted and black, separated from the healthy rows by a shallow ditch. Every fall, after every tree had been picked clean, one apple remained on that branch. Red. Perfect. Too bright against the gray sky. Don't touch that one, Grandpa said. Why? Because I said. That was not enough for me. So on the last afternoon of harvest, while Grandpa was in the shed arguing with a buyer on the phone, I dragged a small ladder to the dead tree and picked the apple. It came off too easily. It was lighter than it should have been, and the stem made a tiny clicking sound when it snapped. I figured it was rotten inside, but when I bit it later in my room, my teeth hit something hard. Not a seed. Plastic. I spit it out and saw a tiny black lens buried inside the apple's fake red skin. Before I could understand what I was looking at, every light in the farmhouse went out. The silence after the power died felt huge. Then from outside came the sound of a ladder being dragged across gravel. My grandfather moved faster than I had ever seen him move. He grabbed my arm, pulled me away from the window, and whispered, "Stay down." Through the lower corner of the glass, I saw them. Figures in the orchard. 5 of them, maybe 6. Dark coats. Hats pulled low. No flashlights. They moved like they knew the rows. One man dragged the ladder toward the dead tree. Another stood under the empty branch, looking up at the spot where the apple had been. They were not ghosts. They were not monsters. They were people. That made it worse. Grandpa took the fake apple from my hand. His face looked older than it had that morning. "You picked it," he said. "I'm sorry." He did not yell. That scared me more. We sat in the dark for almost an hour while the men moved through the orchard. Once, someone stepped onto the porch. The boards creaked under his weight. I held my breath until my chest hurt. Then Grandpa opened the back door and spoke into the darkness. "Sheriff's already on county line," he called. "You boys have about 2 minutes." No one answered. A few seconds later, the figures disappeared between the trees. The sheriff did come, though not in 2 minutes. More like 20. By then, Grandpa had rehung the apple on the dead branch using a thin metal hook I had never noticed. In the morning, it looked exactly the way it always had. Years later, after Grandpa died and the orchard became mine, I found the files in a locked cabinet. Police reports, photos, notes in his handwriting. For years, a group of men had been using isolated farms to move stolen equipment, copper wire, fuel, and whatever else they could take from barns. The dead tree sat near an old service road that cut behind 3 properties. Grandpa had helped the sheriff set up cameras after a neighbor disappeared for 2 days and came back too scared to name who had taken him. The fake apple hit a camera. Leaving it there meant the camera was active. Picking it made the branch look blind. I used to think Grandpa kept secrets because he enjoyed being obeyed. Now I think he knew fear was easier to manage when children mistook it for tradition. I still leave the last apple. Mine has a better camera now. Motion alerts go straight to my phone. The sheriff knows the tree. So do I. People laugh when I tell them not to pick it. They think I am being sentimental or strange. That is fine. Some rules sound old-fashioned because the danger that created them learned how to stay quiet.